Hello, everyone. Welcome to Limbo. My name is João, and today I want to share my conversation with my friend Vera. So, I've met Vera in a community a couple of years ago called Notion Portugal, where people hang around on Discord discussing the note taking app Notion. And eventually, from Discord, we move on to Twitter, and back then she was known as the PhD Notion, selling these awesome templates using Notion for note taking and for knowledge management as she was taking her PhD in the UK. But recently, she released her first company on doing some fact checking on podcasts and doing some research for podcasts. And so, it was the perfect opportunity to bring her aboard and have her share her journey through academia, business, trying to understand how to connect both of these worlds, juggling so many different projects at the same time, and finding a deep need that the market has now that we have podcasts about basically everything under the sun, and they're more ever more like becoming this strong force to basically defining social narratives. And so it's important to make sure that in these large podcasts there's room for some fact checking and making sure that the guests in there are saying the right things. And Vera is basically building a company focused on that. And so we had a wonderful conversation about knowledge, around taking notes, around reading, but also around AI and how it affected her business, academia, and of course podcasting. I really enjoyed this conversation. You should definitely follow what Vera is doing. Her links are in the description, of course, so go ahead and follow her. And please make sure that you take a moment to leave a like and subscribe either on YouTube or on Spotify. It means the world to us. Now, before we go, quick word from our sponsors. The first one is, of course, the Socratic Experience, the school where I work on. We're basically trying to redefine education using the Socratic method. You can know more about us at socraticexperience.com. Then Contexto, the nonprofit that allows for Limbo to exist. And of course, the restaurant Limbo in Lisbon. If you're in Lisbon, search for restaurant Limbo and say that João, the old upstairs neighbor, sent you there. Maybe you have a discount, maybe you won't. You'll see. But in the meantime, here's my conversation with Vera. Yes, everyone, welcome to another episode of Limbo. My name is João, and today I have Vera with me. Vera, welcome to Limbo.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, you see, that's the problem is that this is not fair because here we are, we're both Portuguese, we're both talking English, but I sound like a drunk Russian and you sound like a perfect Englishwoman. So
I
this is
wouldn't
not
go
going
with
to be fair.
perfect.
I mean, look at that accent. I would go with perfect. Like, oh my god. Okay. Well, Vera, thank you so much for doing this. Like I wanted to do this for a while, so it's great to have you here. So maybe let's start with a basic introduction. So, like, do you have like this personal pitch that you tell people like your story in 5 minutes? Do you have any version of that? And if so, like, how would you go about telling who you are, basically?
Okay, well, no, I don't have a prepared one. I probably should. So I'll just come up with something now. So
Yeah.
yeah, like Joan said, I'm from Portugal as well. I'm Vera. I Yeah, I am a qualified optometrist. So I went to university to study optometry. So I wanted to work with people in a vocational career. That's what I thought I wanted to do. And then as I was studying, I kind of got more and more interested in business, and I thought I would probably end up opening my own optician, so somewhere in that field. So that's my academic background. When I went to work in practice, though, I enjoyed it for a very short amount of time, but I figured out that I don't like being in a position where I'm not being challenged. And I think that was the first time in my life where I got comfortable with my job and it was very repetitive from there. And so that led me into looking for other options. And what I saw at that time as a challenge was pursuing a PhD. So when COVID happened, I had a lot of free time. And so I researched PhD projects in the UK. I kind of always wanted to be in the UK. So I looked for projects here, and I've been doing that for the past 4 years, 4+ years now. So that's kind of on paper uh,
Mm-hmm.
who who I am in terms of like my qualifications and everything. But as I'm sure will come across, that's like a little drop in the ocean.
Yeah. So okay, so let's talk about maybe your interest with optometry. So how did
Mhm.
that like came about? Was that something that you always wanted to do? Was that something that emerged later in life? How was that?
So, no, it wasn't something I've always wanted to do. In fact, since I was 16, I wanted to study biochemistry. So, I was a very, very big nerd in school. I've always loved school. I've always loved studying. Oh, my light just gone, but that's fine. Yeah, I've always loved studying, and even in summer breaks, I would just study biochemistry because it was something it really interested me. So, in
Wow.
fact, when I first joined the university, I started an undergraduate in biochemistry, so I got into
Okay.
biochemistry, and I absolutely loved that first year. So we did a lot of lab work, and I thought it was really interesting, but I couldn't see myself stuck in a lab. I thought it was very lonely, and I just didn't see a future where I would be stuck in a lab doing
Mm,
cell work. So even though I loved that year, I knew that that wasn't it, and I knew that I like talking to people. I like being out there in the world, and I wanted a more concrete future at the time, I think. I just
mm,
wanted some stability. So I thought going for something vocational and working with people would be more fulfilling. And since I was 3, I've been wearing glasses. So I've been going to the optometrist since for all my life, basically. So I was very familiar with that work, and so that's how it came. I was trying to look for things in healthcare because of that aspect of working with people, and optometry just seemed like one where I could bring in the business aspect as well in the future if I wanted to. So I did think about that as a possibility from the
mm.
start. So
Interesting.
that's kind of what happened. And then I did fall in love with optometry when I started studying it.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
and this is all still in Portugal, right?
Yes. So this is
Yeah.
all in Portugal. I was living at home. I didn't move out to go to university, so I was living with my parents all throughout university.
Oh, okay, interesting. Okay, so when like just a quick side note, do you how did you discover like do you remember or is there a story around when did you discover that you weren't able to see properly and had to wear glasses, or was it just
That's
like
a good
mom I can
question.
see? Yeah.
That's a really good question. So I no, I didn't. Like I said, I was 3, so I could barely talk. My
Fair.
parents were the ones who figured out. So I used to watch TV literally glued to the
Glued.
TV, like standing and glued to the TV. And then there were a few things like one that my parents always talk about is we were in my grandparents' house and my grandma was walking up the street, and my parents just went like, "Oh look, grandma's coming," and I was like, "Where?"
Where?
Like I can't see.
Yeah.
So imagine a little 3-year-old like, what are you talking
Where?
about?
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, I'm really short-sighted, so I really can't see.
Yeah, look, you're preaching to the choir here. I am blind as I don't even know. Like
Same.
the reason why I asked this is because like I had trauma figured out that I wasn't able to see. Like when I started to
Hmm.
understand, like I was 6 probably, and
Hmm.
so what happened to me was I started to understand that I couldn't see, and so we went to the doctor, and they said, well, okay, we're going to order you glasses, but it will take
Hmm.
probably like a week to arrive. And so in that week,
Yeah.
I was in school. I was in the front row, and I couldn't see
Oh.
anything. So I was like standing like
Oh.
that, and I was asking to the teacher, can I get up to see close? And so I would just walk over to the
Oh.
blackboard and see, okay, got it, and come back.
Oh.
So yeah, that's God.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's sorry, go ahead.
No, 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 no. Yeah, I can relate. Yeah. So if something from the moment I put my first pair of glasses on, it's like my life was complete. Like this is all that I've ever
Yeah.
wanted.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, same, same.
Yeah.
And it's such a it's like it's such a great because I feel like that area um is such it's so interesting because a lot of times people take their vision for granted, right? I feel like a lot
Hmm.
of that happens when I'm with friends, and for some reason like I take off my glasses and someone says, "Well, look at that," and I'm like, "Well, you need to wait," right? Or if I'm having my contact lenses and I need to take them off, or one of them is
Yeah.
not right, like and I talk a lot about this with friends where it's like we take so many of these basic things for granted, right? And it's
Yeah.
only when you don't have your glasses and you're panicking in the middle of or your contact lenses drop and you're in the middle of a show with thousands of people around you and you're like, where are my friends? This is going to be a fun journey. Like it's something that you
Yeah.
figure out.
I've got a
Uh,
crazy story if you want, like I can summarize
yeah,
it
yeah,
really quickly, but on that topic, so one of the scariest moments of my life is relating to this. I can't remember how old I was, but maybe like 6, 7 as well. And I had gone on holiday with my grandparents to Nazaré. You'll
yeah,
know it.
yeah.
So we were there. I was with my grandmother in the beach, and I wanted to go and dive in the ocean. And so I went up to her to take my glasses off because I wanted to dive. So I left my glasses with her. She was right there. And then I went and I did my dive, and I was like having fun in the water. And then the moment came where I was done being underwater, and I needed my glasses back. So I look back. And I have no clue where my grandmother is. Zero clue. And I was a
Poor
really
Vera.
shy kid. So I was just like, I didn't want to look obviously lost. So I was
Yeah,
like, just looking back and trying to figure out and thinking I should ask someone, but I was too shy to ask someone. And so I just stayed there and I just played. And to me, that felt like 5 hours. It
yeah.
wasn't that long, but to me it felt like I was there for 5 hours and then I started getting really cold and I was shivering because I wasn't playing. I was just by the freezing cold water. And then eventually, during that time, I thought, I'm never seeing my parents again. I'm never seeing my family
Jesus.
again. Someone is just going to take me when it gets dark, and that's the end of my life. So I really believed that. And so
Poor you.
eventually, my grandmother did come. I hugged her and I started crying so much. And yeah, that was one of the scariest moments of my life.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally identify with that. That happened so many times when I was with my granddad, but and my grandma on vacation. But
Mm,
usually, like I wasn't a shy kid, so I would just say, "Well, can someone
oh,
please help me find my grandparents?" And you would see my granddad
yeah.
just come around from like the sand saying, "We're here, we're here." I'm like, "Oh, okay, no need, no need. She's there." Uh, yeah. But okay, so going back to you being a nerd, your own words, I have this
Yep.
tendency to figure out that I love nerds usually because nerds are very kind people, and so like
Oh.
I think that, yeah, at least in my life I've had that experience over and over again. So
Hmm.
tell me a little bit about that. Like, how's your relationship with learning? Because one of the things that I've associated with you is exactly this the learning aspect of your life. Like you,
Hmm.
when I met you, and I went back to figure out when did I met you, and I met you through Gustavo from Notion Portugal, who's on
Oh,
Twitter,
okay.
and he said, "Well,
Yeah.
if you're part of this community, you should follow these people." One of them was you, and
Oh,
so.
wow.
Uh, we yeah and so but basically I met you through Notion Portugal and as I got a hold of more things in your life, I realized, oh, okay, so learning is always a part of what you're doing. So you were
Yeah.
studying, you're taking a PhD, so that of course involves learning. You were part of Notion Portugal, and you were learning how to make all of these different templates, etc. You now have Philoscripting, which also relates with learning, and you just told me that you always loved school. So
Yeah.
one of the things that I wanted to know is like, is that relationship with learning, was that something natural? Do you always felt like that way, or is that something that you cultivated throughout your life?
It's a great question, and one that I've actually thought quite a bit about, because I wonder why is it that I like things that other people seem to really dislike. So I do think it comes down to my mum. So, when I was really young, so I come from a working class family, and so we never really had much money, and I had to grow up with my mum telling me, "Sorry, we can't afford it," when I asked
Yeah.
for something. And so, since I was really small, my mum always told me, "I want you to have a better life than we do," and in order to get that, if you go to university, you'll be able to get a better future, you'll be able to get a better job. She never forced me to do it, but she's always taught me that through education, you can achieve better life outcomes. I think that's maybe what triggered something when I was really small. So I
Mm.
always gave quite high importance to school. Not to say that I studied a lot, because we can get into that, because I really didn't. But I did know the importance of school. And so I think that's maybe why I always had a good relationship with school. The other thing is my parents never got involved with my schoolwork since year
Mm,
one, and they never got involved. I was completely autonomous. They never knew what homework I had or anything. So I think that also like me taking ownership of everything made me like,
interesting.
I don't know, it was I really enjoyed it. It was like I was pursuing something, and yeah, I enjoyed it since year one all the way until, I finished, well, maybe until now, still
Yeah.
still going. I think that's what it was.
It's interesting. So, did you like? How did you learn how to study? Was that something that came natural to you? Did you like struggle in the beginning? Because usually, like, there's people that will say, "Well, my mom used to study with me, and then I figured it out." Or like, I used to know this guy that from until high school he never studied, and their
Hmm.
parents like his parents weren't like like you do you whatever, and so he didn't study. And then when he went to high school and the level of knowledge got higher, he suddenly
Hmm.
find himself in this position of, okay, now I need to study and I have no idea how to do it because I never
Um,
had to do it. So how was
mhm.
your relationship with that? Like, were you self-taught? um,
Well, I'm not your classic. I mean, at least at university level, you or in every class, you always have those people who make loads of notes and they just so organized. That is not me. I am not organized at all, at all. I'm not that kind of student that would go home and have like all these things.
yeah.
I would make a plan for the most important, like national exams or something. But for the most part, growing up, I never really had a plan. I think what made me a good student was I was always a really good listener. So when I sat in class, I really, really listened and I really, really learned in class.
Hmm.
And then I would go home and then do my homework and then do the bare minimum,
Yeah.
and that was it until high school, until things get really, really hard. Again, I never really had a studying plan, or I never really spent much time studying. I forgot my homework all the time, like early teen years. My friends would be like, "Oh, what was your result in this exercise?" And I was like, "What exercise?" I was like, "What do you mean we had homework?"
I
That was
feel you.
me.
Yeah.
That was me. I had no clue when the tests were. Like, luckily, my best friend from year one till university, she is super organized, and she's the one who would be like, "Vera, we got text next week."
Yeah.
Um,
You're like, okay.
so, so I never really, yeah, I never really had a strategy. I guess when I went to university, again, what I did was I would study as we were learning. So quite often before, depending on the modules, but before class, I would study what was going to be in that lecture. So I would go a bit earlier to the university and have a look through.
Hmm.
Sometimes I would do that after the lecture, but I kind of followed it as I was learning, so that by the time the test came, I didn't have much to do because I followed it through. And I guess this depends on the discipline you have. Mine was always very sciencey, so it was a lot more about understanding concepts and
Hmm.
understanding how things work rather than memorizing. I am terrible at memorizing anything.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Absolutely, absolutely great. And actually, you just touched on something that I would love to talk about, which is you apparently, from what you're saying, like, you always had this inclination towards STEM and sciences.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, Once again, was that something natural? Like, when did you realize that you were more interested in that area than, maybe, say, compared with humanities or something like that?
Great question again. Th Again, that's one of the things that I devote a lot of time thinking about now, because
Hmm.
now I don't feel as close to the science as I've always felt until this
Yeah.
point. So I think that so like I said, I'm really bad at memorizing. So I think
Mm.
because of that reason, I always disliked the humanities. So for example, history was my least favorite subject all my life. But now that I'm more mature, I find myself wanting to learn about history and
Hmm.
wanting to be more involved in the social sciences than I ever had. And I think, yeah, I think maybe it's just that I always liked problem solving. I think that's
Hmm.
a big one. I like figuring out how things work and then solving problems with it. And I think
Mm,
that is what it boils down to. My favorite subject was always maths, in school, maths and English. Those were my two favorite subjects,
yeah.
always. So I think it's the problem solving aspect of it.
Okay.
But yeah,
That makes
if I
sense.
were to go back, then I don't know, because now I have different feelings about the
Yeah.
social sciences.
Yeah, it's interesting because you and I have actually opposite experiences. So when I was in middle school, like I loved history. It was my favorite subject,
Oh wow.
other than music.
Hmm.
But like and it's interesting because like our perception affects so much. So when I look back at middle school
Hmm.
and think about like history, sciences, physics, etc., like I in my head I associate memorizing way more with
Hmm.
sciences than with history.
Oh wow.
Yeah, because
Wow.
yeah, exactly. Because that's what I was thinking. Because when I always thought about history not as something that you memorize, but as a story, literally. And so I would do this
Hmm.
thing where I would absolutely love classes, and I would like a lot of like my friends realized that I really
Hmm.
enjoyed history, and I really because to me the only thing that you had to memorize were like 3 or 4 dates. The rest of it you needed to
Hmm.
like tell a story that like that
Wow.
allow you to understand why did certain things happen, right? And so I used to do these things where once I ended up studying history for a test, like friends would come over and I would basically tell them the way that I memorized, like the story that I memorized. So these guys
Hmm.
were here and they were like, "Well, what if we go that way?" Like I would add all
Hmm.
of these comedic elements to it, and yeah, and then people would take better grades than I did because when I went to do the grades to the test, I would probably forget something or something like that. That was actually one of the moments that I realized, well, you know what, I enjoyed this idea of helping people learn. Like even if they're
Hmm.
having better grades than me, like I don't care
Yeah.
because I know that somewhere along the line, like that was a part of me helped them get through that. It was actually one of the moments I realized that. But
Oh
yeah, and
wow.
so but when I looked at sciences, I was like, oh God, I need to memorize all of this. But now that I'm more mature, I'm actually doing the opposite. So I continue loving the social sciences, but I'm starting to look at hard sciences and realizing, well, this is way more interesting than I thought, or at least than I
Oh
remembered.
wow.
Yeah, and even like at work right now, I'm teaching a class on emerging technologies, and so like this was like one day I was teaching a class, and suddenly you're like, well, next week you're starting, and you have to teach a class on emerging technologies. So I had to go deep into research around STEM and around everything else. I was like, you know what,
Yeah.
this is way more interesting than I give it credit for. So yeah, we're
Oh
having like
wow.
this opposite experience on that.
That is really interesting, and I'll be thinking about that, about how what you're interested in is something that just comes out so effortlessly, and you see everything else as something you have to put effort in, rather than the other way around. I never thought about it that way, and
Yeah,
never. That's really
yeah.
interesting. Thank you for
Yeah,
sharing.
and no, you're welcome. And I would even say that that you can change that relationship. So I always tell the same story when I'm talking about music. Like a lot of people just assume that because I went to college and I wanted to be a musician and I played a couple of gigs and I was good at it, people just assume that, oh, you were very talented. And I'm like, no. No, not at all. Like I don't know if I told you the story or not, but like what I used to do was in my classes, I would basically ask philosophical questions to the teacher because I didn't study at all.
Hmm.
So in a guitar class, what would happen is you'd have 45 minutes of a class, and you would play, the teacher would help you, etc. But I didn't study, so I didn't
Hmm.
play it that well. Like when I started to play the guitar, I wasn't good, and so what I would do is I would go to classes and I would ask philosophical questions to the teacher like, well,
Mm.
what do you think the role of music in life is? And so he would start rambling and I was like,
Wow.
okay, like let's count the minutes. He's talking, keep talking, and so I don't have to show you that I didn't enjoy it. But then when eventually that didn't work, of course, and the teacher basically spent 40 minutes saying you're never going to be able to play, go home and give up,
Oh,
etc. And I was like, oh wait, I'll show you. And I started to play, like I just wanted to show him how wrong he was, and then I fell in love
yeah.
with the guitar. And so this
Oh,
just to say that
wow.
in terms of perception and
Hmm.
effort, like that changes as you change the relationship with whatever you're studying, right? And then
Yeah.
that ends up making the whole difference.
Absolutely. That reminds me a little bit of philosophy because you mentioned your question. So I don't know about your school, but in my school we had philosophy, I think, for 3 years and during high school. And I saw philosophy, the subject, the same as I saw history, which is I got to memorize all these things, what this philosopher believes in, what that philosopher believes in. I saw it the same way as I've always seen history. And now looking back, I literally went back home and digged my philosophy notebook because I
Wow.
wanted to see it. Because now I'm just like, I want to learn all this stuff so badly. And at the time, I just thought it was all so boring.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. So going back to your career, what was it about like the UK that attracted you? Why the UK, not any other country?
Yeah. Also a question I've given a lot of thought to. I think, and I don't know what your perception is where you live in Portugal, but I think maybe it's the fact that at least growing up, I feel like we've always looked up to the British for some reason. And obviously the UK, that there are a lot of opportunities in the UK. So I think it comes from my ambition, and I've always liked English, so I've always been really, really comfortable with English. I started researching things in English when I was in high school because I noticed that if I researched it in Portuguese, the results were going to be rubbish. If I researched it in English, I get like this world of knowledge. So
Yeah.
I became really interested in English because of that. And then as a result, and because of the opportunities that the country would bring, I kind of always looked up to the UK. And in fact, in high school, I wanted to go study biochemistry in the UK for university, and I really wanted to make that happen. I researched it, and then I realized my parents can't afford to
Yeah.
to let me stay here and coming here at 18. So logistically, it couldn't happen. I think if my parents had the possibilities to help me with that, I would have wanted to do that and not
Mm.
study in Portugal. So it kind of always come from there. I think it's the opportunities and yeah,
Yeah.
the fact that I'm comfortable with English just seemed really quite easy, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. So, um, you one of the things that you meant, like, just on one more question on the UK. How is it living there? Like, did you find it easy? Did you enjoy it? Was there like this process of adaptation? How was that?
Interesting. I don't know, I didn't mention this yet, and I don't know if I ever mentioned it to you, but when I graduated from optometry, when I worked for a year and a half in clinical practice, it wasn't in Portugal, it was actually in Luxembourg.
Mm.
So before I moved to the UK, I first moved to Luxembourg to
Interesting.
work in optometry. So that was my first experience leaving the
Working abroad.
country.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was a way crazier experience because my French was just not that good. And so I really struggled finding an apartment, for example, with speaking to the agencies. They would not want to speak English, and it was just the whole thing was really stressful. And then starting a job, the first time I met my manager, she speaks so fast French, and she was like showing me around. And the first time I met her, I didn't understand one single word, the whole thing she said.
For you.
And I was about to start my job in that place 2 days after. So that's a much crazier
Yeah.
story.
Clearly.
Um,
Clearly.
so yeah, thankfully I ended up learning French quite quickly, and then because it was in the optometry world, the amount of vocabulary was quite comprised
Yeah.
into this sector, so it was okay. But that was my first experience living abroad, and then moving to the UK, I've been watching British YouTubers since I was a teenager. So I became really familiar with slang, with
Yeah.
specific English from the UK, and also a bit of the culture too.
Mm-hmm.
So I was exposed to the British culture through YouTube
YouTube.
very
Yeah.
early on by watching vlogs. So I think that was one of the things that made me not have that much of a cultural shock when I came here. However, there are lots of things that I still cannot comprehend and do not understand why they work a certain way here. It is very different from Europe. Everything is very different from Europe.
Can you give
If you
just one
want
or
to
two
tell me,
examples? Yeah,
yeah, I can give you the one that I'm still struggling getting.
Please
past.
do.
So I feel like in Europe, we're very straight to the point. And if we if we don't have anything nice to say, we don't say anything. And here, people, when they don't have anything nice to say, they will say something nice and not mean it
Mm.
because politeness is a thing. So
Yeah,
people
oh
are
yeah.
very polite. And it took me a while to understand that all these people that have been really polite with me, most of them probably didn't mean it to be that polite. I thought they were just really
Oh.
polite. But then with time, I understood that it's a lot of it is like just politeness. You know, people will say things just to be polite.
Oh, okay.
Now, there's pros and cons with that. At the start, I thought it was really negative because I was just like, I can never know who's being, honest about
Yeah.
their feelings. But then with time, you kind of, especially going back to Portugal now and experiencing that culture again, sometimes it's just nice when people are nice to you.
That's true.
So so
Honestly,
you got
that's
your
true.
pros and cons. So
Yeah.
I think that was one of the biggest cultural
Interesting.
shocks I got.
I-
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so let's go into business. You mentioned that,
Okay.
when you were looking at optometry, you already think about setting up your own clinic, and then, of course,
Yeah.
by doing that work, you realize, maybe this is not exactly the kind of business that I want to have.
Yeah.
However, I'm interested in, how did, like, that interest in business started for you?
Hard to tell, really. Everyone's talks about the little business you did as a kid or like selling this and that. I only thing I did, I think that I remember was in year 5 and 6. So we would have been like what 12, 11, 12, 13,
Yeah.
something like that. So I remember doing key rings with these little things that we had at the time. So I remember making those and then selling them in school. I still remember I used to charge €2 per key ring. So I used to sell it during the school breaks
The
to like
break.
the kids
Yeah.
around or try to. I think that was kind of the only thing that I really did. My mom works in sales, so I don't know if that's related as well. So she works in a family business, so kind of yeah, I knew a little bit about selling and stuff from
Yeah.
there, which is not really business, but just thinking about growing up, some relationship to business. Besides that, I think it all comes back to ambition. And I think, I don't know, at one point I thought my ambition was going to go towards being the best clinician I could be. But
Hmm.
then for some reason, that didn't interest me as much because it does still seem like it's narrowing a beam rather than broadening it.
Mm.
So I feel like I'm interested in ambition, not in the way that it brings you like to the more specialist of
Right.
a field, and I feel like I'm more interested in expanding my skill set. So I think business comes as something where I can do that and something where I can grow in different directions.
Yeah.
So I think that's where the interest comes from. And then optometry, obviously, I just put the two and two together and I thought, oh, I can find the manufacturers and I can choose the glasses I want to sell and then I can, manage the people and
Yeah.
it's a bit all that.
Yeah, have you ever read Range, the book by, I'm going to forget his name. God, okay, I'll need to check it. But Range is basically this
Yeah.
book where his basic argument is, um, you have specialists and you have generalists, and they relate
Hmm.
with knowledge in a very different way. Like, a specialist usually is like, it can be described as a T person, where it's like you have a bunch of knowledge across like your horizontal spectrum, but then you have like a very deep knowledge in one thing, so you kind of form this T, right?
Hmm.
Whereas a generalist is someone that's more focused on knowing lots of things about lots of things. And so
Hmm.
his point, and it's not called Newport. Who wrote that? Let me just check this real quick, because otherwise I
That's
won't be
okay.
able to continue to read this. So, Range was written by David Epstein. Got it.
Okay.
I wasn't going to be able to continue the interview without knowing that. So,
No way.
David writes in the book this idea of, like, where you when you approach knowledge, like in this modern world, like, most of us would benefit from having like an approach of a generalist, trying to have knowledge about all of these different things, which seems like something that you also identify with. So,
Hmm.
like going back to, and just a quick comment. A lot of people assume that, oh, like they have this idea of maybe I want to get into business, but I never had that when I was a kid. So maybe this is not something that really interests me. I think that's bollocks. Makes no sense. I like you were
Mm-hmm.
mentioning like in fifth and sixth grade you were like selling these keychains. Like I didn't do anything until I was in high school, and what I
Mm.
did when I was in high school was I tried to get my band booked in places. So that was like
Mm-hmm.
my first notion of business. And I feel like, there's no point in, yeah, some people are like selling lemonade or something like that when they're very young, but that doesn't mean that if that's not the case, you cannot go into business. So,
Totally
okay,
agree.
so you had that it's one more thing to add to these vast things or realms of knowledge that you have.
Hmm.
So maybe we can talk about like specifically philoscripting. So like,
Okay.
or in fact, before going into that, let's go into one of your first business experiences, which is before that, like having the templates on Notion, right? So do you mind telling that
Yeah.
story?
Yes, of course. Yeah, that is an important story in the course of what's to
Exactly.
come. So first year of my PhD, it was COVID time, so everyone was working from home, and I was learning 24/7 every day. For the first year, especially given COVID, the whole point of the PhD was to get familiar with this topic that I'm studying. So it was a lot of reading, a lot of writing, and a lot of learning. So at this time, I can't remember exactly how I found Notion, probably through YouTube, I can't remember, or Reddit. I was using Reddit a lot. The Notion Reddit was really good. So I got into Notion for that purpose to organize my PhD, my meeting notes, my literature notes, everything, and I thought it was great. And then I found out that there was a community on Twitter, and so I joined Twitter for that purpose. I had Twitter before, but I joined one account just for this. And then I saw that there was a massive community and everyone was learning together. And I was getting better and better at using the tool. And I had lots of different ideas that other people didn't seem to have. So I was tweeting a lot because, again, I was at home and I was using Twitter, Notion all day.
Notion.
So
Yeah.
every time I came with I came up with a little trick or something, I would kind of like share it on Twitter. So a lot of people got interested from me just helping out with different things. And then the templates started happening. So I created a task management template that I was using a very similar one. So I just created a similar one from scratch. And um and then I think I got like, I don't know, 500 downloads or something in a like relatively short period of time. And at the start, I was giving them out for free, and then I realized that people were selling them. And so then I put a price tag on it, and that was the first time that I was like, "Oh my goodness, people will give you money on the internet."
Yeah.
And I was like, people are just spending money on digital products. And I think that opened up my whole mind, and that will forever change how I do things from now onwards. That showed me that there is money to be made if you have value to give.
Yeah.
So yeah, I continued that for a little bit. I created some other templates, and I got a nice income for that period. I was really active on Twitter. I was getting pretty consistent income, and the nice thing is Gumroad pays you every week. So on the weekend, it's just
Mhm.
like a little paycheck every weekend. So that was a little taste of being paid for your services as well, which was really nice. So that yeah, that was the story about PhD Notion. And then when I started the data collection phase of my PhD, then I was on the go with patients and everything. So I kind of had to like slow that down, and it slowly kind of died out. But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's the notion.
Yeah, and it's such a great experience when you like. I feel like a lot of people have that wow moment. It doesn't matter if it's with digital products, physical products, services, whatever. But when you realize,
Hmm.
oh wait, people will pay you for you to
Yeah.
for something that you built or for something that you do, um, which I think it's very different from having a regular job, because a regular job you're like, okay,
Hmm.
I'm doing this, and but usually if you're setting up your own business or if you're selling your own product or something like that, it's because you really enjoy doing it, or of course there's like if you want to find a niche and find a product for that niche and sell it, usually you don't have to have an emotional relationship with that, which is fine. And that way you have like the insight of, oh my god, people will pay me on the internet. But still, I feel like that's a very important insight for anyone that's interested in business. So okay, you go to the data collection part of your PhD, and so the business aspect ends up stopping for a while, and then suddenly philoscripting happens. So tell us about that.
Well, it was an idea I had for a really long time because I consume a lot of content, especially on YouTube. I've been a YouTube consumer for since I was probably like 15, 16, like a lot. I watch a lot of YouTube and I learn a lot because that's where I'm there. I want to learn. And sometimes when it comes to the health podcasts, I would often listen to them and they sound very salesy. And then as a scientist, I feel really funny about people talking about science with kind of a reason behind it because most people that are going on podcasts, for example, they're either selling a book or selling a course or selling a service. So I started feeling really uncomfortable listening to these podcasts and
That's
listening to
interesting.
health claims from people who had second intentions behind what they were saying. And so it's been something that it's been playing on my mind. And I noticed I stopped listening to those episodes because I just didn't have the trust. And yeah, so the topic of misinformation kind of came up in December, last December, so a few months ago, and it became really big on the news. And I thought I need to do something about this. And so I contacted one of the biggest podcasters in the world and said, you need to be doing something about this. You need to have a researcher doing this so that people can again trust these um, these guests you're having and the impact these podcasts are having in the wider population is so huge because the audiences are getting bigger and bigger with podcasts and spreading misinformation about health could be
It's very
really, really
dangerous.
dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just it just kind of came from that. And then I thought, oh, I can maybe make a business out of this. It's a skill that I have and it's something that I'm really passionate about. And it's a little gap that is currently in the world. And podcasts are so new, so that's why the gap is still here. And that's where the idea came from.
Yeah, such a great
Yeah.
story, and it's when you send that message, and you know you're saying to one of the biggest podcasts in the world once again, and if people want to find out, like maybe they can go and follow your page because sometimes you have glimpses of what the which show it is, and I'm
Hmm.
not sure if you're able to tell it or not. So
I don't think so.
yeah, exactly. So, but like when you reach out to them and saying, well, you should be doing this, um,
Hmm.
was there a part of you that already had in the back of her mind, like, well, I should do this, or were you reaching out just purely as a fan saying you need to do this? Like how?
That's a good question. So, like I said, initially, as in like last year, way before any of this happened, I thought I could do this, and this is something that, yeah, I could potentially do. But I have so many of those ideas. I think I can do so many million things. So that was just one of a
Yeah,
million, really. And so when this came up, to be very, very honest with you, I didn't think about the business aspect. I didn't think about the money aspect. I felt so strongly about
yeah,
this. And that message, I'm scared of reading that message back because I know there's going to be so much emotion in there.
yeah,
And I just said, like, you need to be doing this and I can do it. I can do it. Like, if you don't know who will do it, I'll do it. You know, like
yeah.
someone needs to be doing this. So I think I felt it was the passion behind it more than the business in that moment,
Yeah.
and then the business came from realizing, oh no, I could do something here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like and I feel like you're seeing such a great lesson for entrepreneurs listening to this, which is like you're saying, well, I'm afraid to go back because when I'll read a message, I'll see so much emotion, and it's almost like, well, it's not at all a professional message, and now I have a business, so I should
Yeah.
approach it in a different way. But it's like, but here's the thing: it's the fact that you put the emotion. I'm willing to bet it's the fact that you put the emotion that actually unlocked everything else. Because like people, when you care about something, when people care about something, they're talking about it, like you can feel it. Like, oh, okay, this person really
Mm,
cares about this, right? And
yeah.
one of the things that I always tell to my students when we're talking about business is that business is made by people for people, right? And people care about emotions. And so a
Hmm.
lot of the times the best thing that you can do is just to be extremely emotional and tell someone that you really believe that you can, like, your life will change by engaging with my business or engaging. Like, I remember one of those moments. I was fortunate enough in COVID, so 2020 or 2021, like in my first business, we everyone was freaking out with COVID, a lot of anxiety, a lot of people working from home, and we were lucky enough in the business that I founded to, like, the government reached out to us. A part of the government reached out to us and asked, well,
Mm,
we want to hear from you and try and figure out if there's something that we can work on with the people that are working with us, like everyone that's like
hmm.
under the actual people in the assembly. Like, we're struggling, we're stressing, so let's make something. Let's see if we can make something. And so, and I remember
Hmm.
like meeting with them in one of these very public big offices that Portuguese government has. Um, and I remember them walking through what was happening. And before I went to that meeting, we were in the car, we were strategizing, we were both like, well, we need to, because I went with one of the
Hmm.
people that worked with me, and we were like, okay, we need to be very calm, very polite. Let's,
Hmm.
like, this is a strategy, it's a great opportunity, let's do this. We we entered the meeting, and after 10 minutes of them telling us like what was happening, I'm not saying that we were screaming, we were like, look, you need to do this, like, you don't even need to pay us if that's not, but like, you need to do this and this, and I feel
Yeah.
like that emotional aspect is what sometimes converts people, and makes them,
Yeah.
okay, let's engage this. So it's a great lesson. So, okay, philoscripting, like this idea of research around podcasts, which is definitely and I've told you this before. If I could bet on businesses, I would definitely bet on yours. Not only because of your whole history and the track record that you have, but because I feel like you found a niche that's very, very good. Let me ask you a different question, which is, most of your work in terms of research right now is regarding STEM. If you ever, like, do you plan on doing like episodes on social sciences or in other areas or areas other than STEM? Are you already doing that? Like, what's your goal
Hmm.
with those kinds of episodes or those kinds of podcasts?
That's a good question. So, for the most part, I think it would depend on what subject we're talking about. Because, so one thing, what I'm doing now is more like independent research, but then you have fact checking, which is more a journalism
Mm-hmm.
discipline. So there are a lot of fact checkers who will check inform whether the information is right or wrong, and those are normally done by journalists. So it's something that's really easily done, which I could do. I don't think I would be the most passionate about it,
Mm-hmm.
but if we're talking about subjects, for example, like psychology, that is not really, really that medical. So my plan with that, I really want to get involved in doing research for those subjects as well, and I've done a little bit of it, and it seemed very straightforward. But what I've done is I'm collecting a group of people who have experience in research in multiple disciplines. So I have quite a few people that have a background in research in psychology, which is a subject that comes up quite a bit in podcasts. So the idea for the future is that I will have a database of researchers with a specific background, and therefore they will probably be more efficient as well. So they will do the job much easier and much quicker than someone from a different discipline. So, yeah, the idea for the future is to have this database of people with different backgrounds that can do a better job at every single one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, yeah, no, it does, and it's a great way for people to visualize exactly what are the next steps on your business, which I
Hmm.
love. Um, You mentioned that when you were studying, like you weren't that organized and you did take a lot of notes. But I'm assuming that when you're doing this research, you're actually taking lots of notes in order to then come up with the final product. How, like, walk me through your note taking process, and how has that changed from the days of, say, PhD Notion and what you're doing right now, if it changed?
Good. Okay. Short answer to that one. There is no time for note taking in this.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's like getting the paper. So putting this is the paper, this is what the paper concluded, this is the other paper, this is what it concluded. Look it all together, put it all together, and move on to the next
Wow.
point.
Okay.
So
Got it.
there's no time to have a note-taking system. I think having a note-taking system is a massive privilege that I took for granted in the first year of my PhD.
Mm,
It takes a long time, it takes a lot of effort, and if you're doing it for self-learning, it's great. If you're doing it to create a final product, it is most of the time, and it pains me to say this, a little bit of a waste of time. So
mm.
this is a big topic we can get into because I'm really passionate about note taking.
Yeah. Let's go. So, because I don't agree. Like, I feel like the product that you're trying to present in your business makes absolute sense. That not note taking
Hmm.
is a waste of time, and
Yeah.
because once again, like, and that makes a lot of sense. Like, your approach being, this paper says this paper says this paper says this. These are the conclusions, and send over. Especially because you don't have to, like, it's not up to you to say, and after collecting all of this, and the conclusion is X, Y, and Z, right? You're just presenting the
Hmm.
information as
Hmm.
it is as a researcher, and then people will look
Yeah.
up to it, and take their own conclusions. But um
Yep.
and in that sense, yeah, of course, note taking makes no sense. But I would, like, do you think that note taking make is a waste of time in all products, or is it just in that specific example? Like, what's your take on that?
I get your first reaction because 2 years ago, if I heard myself say this, I would scream at myself and say, "You have no idea what you're talking about," because I was so passionate about note taking and
Yeah.
still am. However, the more I've done final products from the notes, the more I realize that if you want to maximize your process for producing content and producing writing, then note taking might be, I think, let me go back a little bit. I think if you organize your sources well, that's what you need.
Mm,
And it depends on whether it depends what you're taking your notes on. For example, if it's academic notes, which is one part of all of this, which might not match what you're thinking about. But if it's academic notes, I use a reference manager that allows me to take notes within the platform.
mm,
And most of those notes are just highlights straight from the papers. So what I see as notes now are collections of information directly from the source rather than my own notes on it because I'd rather just that process is really quick, so just
mm.
saving highlights, and then if I'm producing something, I'll have the highlights and I'll write it, and then I'll have it written. If I need to use that information again, I'll have the source still. So why am I having to write it as a note and then having to still write that note for this project this way and that project that way? I can
Yeah.
just keep the source and go back to the source when I need to write about it.
Yeah. Okay. So I fully agree with that. So the way that because the way that maybe the difference that we have is, once you collect the source, I see an advantage in maybe looking at it and try to rephrase it in your own words. Just because if you're
Yeah.
producing content, you can look at both of those two versions, right? And instead of looking at the source and thinking, how
Hmm.
can I rewrite this? Okay, I have this rewritten
Hmm.
version. It's fine. If we're talking
Ready.
about, like, reading a book and just doing lots of notes on, oh, I think that this is what he means, or I think that this idea relates with X, Y, and Z, I would agree with you. I think that if that's the case, then that might be a little bit of a waste of time. Even though, like,
Ooh.
like,
Can I stop you there a second
yeah,
before you
yeah,
move
yeah,
on to
of
the next
course.
point? So just on the topic of the book, that's really interesting because I do note take while reading books. And but I note take, so a lot of people scream at me, I write on books. Okay, I'm sorry.
You're
Well,
safe. You're
I write on
safe. You're
books.
safe. I write on books with paper, with pencils, pens, highlights. So
Oh yeah,
totally fine.
pen. Yeah.
Butchering the,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I write so I'm talking non-fiction books.
Okay.
So anything that I'm learning from. So I write on the margins, and usually at the end of the chapter or at the end of that section, I'll write my thoughts, like my actual thoughts on that whole section. I'll write how I think it was written. I'll write what my opinion was on it. Yeah, I'm basically doing like an editor's job, reading the book and
Mm,
trying to like critique it. So I
hmm.
do that throughout the book. But to me, that's not really note taking.
Okay.
It's more like it helps me digest the information and it helps me figure out what my opinion is on it. So writing about something, I'm not counting that as note taking because I
Mm,
am
okay.
I love writing. I love getting my notebook open and start writing about something I've learned about. But I think of that as a thinking process rather than as a note-taking process.
Really? So when you're reading, this is fascinating. So when you're reading a book and you're making like those comments and those margins, you're not thinking about that as note taking, but as like thinking time.
Sorry, I lost you there for one
Oh,
second.
sorry, sorry. No, I was just
Obviously.
asking um if you're reading a book and you're taking notes on the margins in that book, you're not considered that as note taking, but you're considered that as thinking around the book.
Yeah, yeah.
That's so fascinating. Okay, I see that as note taking. That's why, like, and look, and sometimes like, so I used to do this where like I was reading this book. How is it called? It's like I think it's called God is Dead, and it's like a collection of two
Hmm.
essays by Nietzsche. And
Hmm.
I went through the most painstaking process reading that book because I was trying this approach that I don't remember who suggested, but it's like, well, every time that you write something in the book, you should like highlight something in the book, you should write about it to make sure that you understand it. So I did that. It took me way too long to read the book, and I was like, okay, well, at least I've written about every single thing that I've highlighted in the book. I've
Hmm.
reached a bunch of conclusions. So yeah, my understanding is way better than what usually would be. That's a lie.
Hmm.
I don't remember anything about what I wrote. So it's like so that's when I realized okay, so
Yeah.
it's great because you're articulating your own thoughts and maybe you get to a point where you get to use those thoughts and if you get to use because what I realize is that there's value in note taking if you have a very concrete end for it, either in the short term or
Hmm.
long term. So I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
When I'm setting up new classes, like I'm using notes that I took like 4 years ago when I was reading a book on
Hmm.
innovation, and so that's great. But
Hmm.
but it took me 4 years to actually use that, right? So, but if we're just collecting notes without a particular like goal in mind, either you're very lucky and have a system that allows you to track back those notes 4 years afterwards,
Hmm.
which I was lucky enough to have, or what ends up happening is you just collect this lots of knowledge, but it you won't use it. You just get it will get
Yeah.
lost in the garden of knowledge, and maybe that's fine. I don't know.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a strange one, but I think that so going back to the highlights as the source and then my quote unquote what you think is notes and I see it as thinking. For me, note taking is taking the information from the source and writing a note about what the author
Mm,
is saying. And for me, that's what's pointless. But what I'm writing on the side is my thoughts on it. So if I go back to the highlight and I have my thoughts on it, I will remember what I thought about it rather than because it's for me, there's no value in just rewording the author's information, but
mm,
there is a value about what did I think about it in that moment.
mm.
So that's what I think why I don't think about it as note taking and just
Got it.
my thinking.
Got it. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Yeah, yeah. Maybe it's a definition issue. How are you in if in any way? So not on the research for the podcast, but on your own learning journey across like whatever interests you. And I wanna talk about your personal brand for a bit. But like, how are you integrating AI on your own learning outside of the podcast? Like, if any, like, do you use any kind of AI to learn stuff?
No, I use it for maximizing my processes and speeding things up, but I mean, no, I don't really use it unless I have a particular question I need an answer to. I do use, but again, that's back to my work. I do use AI to help me with like sometimes writing a sentence differently, that I'm not just
Mm,
not
yeah.
getting it right. So to just like get through that block. But in my personal like learning, I don't really use AI. I'm
Yeah.
kind of like I'm very free flowing. So whatever gets thrown at me, I'll just get really excited about it rather than me looking for it necessarily. I don't really look for
Yeah.
things. It's kind of like things just appear and I'm like, "Oh, let's
Oh,
follow
that's
that
interesting. Yeah.
path that just came up." Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I wanna we're approaching the end of the conversation, but I wanna talk about your personal brand. Like this is something that you've been working on for a while, but now recently, on Instagram, you have this series of notes called "Don't Read This," which I
hmm
absolutely love. So tell me, like, what is the like? How did that idea came from, and what are these posts that people can read in Life Design with Vera in Instagram?
Oh dear. Yeah, personal brand. That's something that I want to start doing, and I've never done it before, so I have no clue about what I'm doing. So what I'm doing is I'm experimenting with some ideas that come up and some advice that I see. So the Don't Read This series kind of started because I was going to just be doing a series of quotes from writing that I've done either on that day or previously. And I think the first draft, so I, as any creator, I'm sure you know that your first draft is never the same as your last draft. So I kind of, my first one was just a quote, and then I was like, it felt like maybe I was using someone else's quote
Mm,
or it just felt really bland. And so the next iteration was I wrote read this on top of it. And then
mm,
I was like, that's a bit better, but still, would I really? Because I was thinking if I saw that on Instagram, would I really care to read it? And then I just thought, why don't I just put don't read this? Because, people get intrigued. So
yeah.
that was like kind of like the third iteration down the line. And I thought maybe that'll make people read it because they're just like, why are you telling me not to read it?
Yeah.
I'm gonna read it. So
Yeah.
that was the idea behind it.
Yeah, and it's working. I really enjoy it. And I would say that I would push against the idea that you're not working on your personal brand just because you're either, if you want to change something with that personal brand, that's fine. But on Twitter, like, I feel like you've been working on that for a while, actually.
hmm
And so, yeah, I will say one thing. I do, when I was
hmm
doing research for our conversation, like, I do miss having a place
hmm
where I get to read long form writing by you.
hmm
So
hmm
that would be my open suggestion in the podcast, like
Okay.
figuring out like a Substack or a blog or something like that.
hmm
But
hmm
especially if you're writing
Yeah.
already, just having those long form pieces of writing is great, especially because
Thank you.
as from a personal brand standpoint, you want to have different like platforms to match different needs for
Yeah.
someone who's researching you or someone who's interested in you. So I would
hmm
definitely think about that. Okay, Vera,
Yeah.
we're
Good. Thank you.
we're finishing the podcast. But I have one last question to ask you, which
Sure.
is like when like you're doing all of these different things, like you have your PhD, you have Philoscript, you have like your own Philoscripting, sorry, you have your own page. Is there a short, medium, or long term vision of what you would like to achieve that combines all of them? Like, what's your goal at the end of the line with all these different things that you're doing, if any?
Oh dear. Honest answer, I don't know. When I look at future, I see business, but I don't see business, knowledge related business. I don't see a specific
Mm,
business. I know that it's going to be business, but I don't know how that looks just yet. So I think
got it.
this is the short to medium term, and I think that I still haven't, like I was telling you in the beginning about broadening my spectrum, I don't think I have broadened it enough, and I've never done creative work before, and that is something that I'm super passionate about, and I tell myself, how did I live all this time and I still haven't used my creativity? Maybe I have used my creativity in thought, but I love a lot of things in the creative world, like fashion, interior design, and things as such. And just I don't know, photo editing, video editing. There's so much stuff I'm interested in, and I haven't dabbed into that yet. And even though Philoscript has aligned with the business side using my current set of skills, if we're talking long term, I still want to broaden outside of knowledge work and into the creative realm. So,
Beautiful. That's such a great
yeah.
answer. Well, Vera, if people want to know more about you, if people want to follow you in your work, where they can find you.
I think best place is Life Design with Vera on Instagram. That's like the start of everything, and then from there, hopefully, people can find what the little bits that come out of it. But that should be the main place where to find me.
Beautiful. We'll put that in the link. That link in the description. Also, go and follow Phil Scripting on Instagram as well. It's on Vera's bio,
Thank
so
you.
you also can do that. And Vera, this was amazing. Thank you so much. It was such a great conversation, and you know that I've told you this before, but I'll do it publicly. I truly believe in what you're doing. I feel like you have such a great
Thank
profile
you.
to be on that project, and can't wait to see what you're going to build with Phil Scripting and outside of knowledge working
Thank you.
space, let's call it that. Okay, thanks so much for being here. It was a
Thank
pleasure.
you.
You're welcome. For everyone listening to the podcast, if you want to subscribe to our YouTube channel or leave or in your favorite podcast platform, we would appreciate it, but as well as leaving a review and sharing it with your friends. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you.